and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you on CGTN from Beijing. The ISIL took the world by surprise in 2014 when it swept through northern Iraq. 3 years later, on December the 9th, 2017, the Iraqi military declared it has fully liberated all of Iraq's territory of ISIL terrorist gangs. 1 year on, with ISIL eliminated, Iraq finds itself caught in deadlocked parliamentary politics, hampering the war-torn country's recovery. Everybody had hoped that Iraq would be able to pick up the pieces after the war, but when domestic differences run deep, can there be chance for lasting peace?
Iraq declared victory Saturday in its war against ISIL.
Mosul is the Islamic State's Iraqi capital no more.
The Prime Minister came sounding triumphant.
They're jubilant in Mosul. They've driven the extremists out. But it's come at a price.
A year since their liberation from the Islamic State militant group, Iraqis are still struggling to pick up the pieces. In the south of the country, an economic crisis and lack of basic services such as water and electricity have driven people out onto the streets.
We want reforms in this country. As young people, we are jobless and we don't have anything.
In the north, after 3 years of ferocious fighting, more than 1.8 million Iraqis are still displaced. The people are looking to the parliament elected in May to bring about change, but analysts say progress is slow. No thanks to corruption, political and sectarian conflicts, and a less than peaceful handover of power. The roots of these rifts are decades old, and the new Prime Minister, Adel Abdel Mahdi, appointed in October, has not been able to assemble a cabinet. According to the United Nations, violence has dropped across Iraq. However, sporadic attacks linger. While ISIL has been driven out of the cities, they have made a comeback in remote mountains along the border. In a sign of hope, Mosul's landmark Al-Nuri Mosque, destroyed by an IS militant group, is being rebuilt. The process is slow, but it has begun.
How far has Iraq gone after ISIL defeat? We have with us in our Beijing studio He Wenping, who is a professor from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. In Baghdad on the phone, we have Ahmed Rashdi, who is the president of the House of Iraqi Expertise Foundation and policy expert scholar on the Iraqi parliament. And in Boston, we have Jim Walsh, senior research fellow of the Security Studies program from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I want to welcome all of you. First of all, Mr. Walsh, 1 year on, is the situation as peaceful as we wish it to be?
Well, there's no doubt there's been improvement. ISIL does not control 1/3 of Iraq's territory. That's certainly a good thing. Has the threat passed and gone away completely? The answer there is no. Certainly there are cities along the Syrian border that still feel threatened by ISIL, and there continue to be the threats posed by individual terror attacks, bombings that might take place in different cities. And I would say this more generally. You know, part of this is the question of security is not how strong your adversary is. It's not whether ISIL is weak or strong. It's how vulnerable you are, how vulnerable Iraq is. And I would say that ISIL's invasion of Iraq reflected in large part the vulnerability of Iraq at the time. The leader, Maliki, had alienated the Sunni constituency. He had undermined the army through favoritism and corruption, and that left Iraq vulnerable because of its own actions. And today, Iraq is in a bit of a political stalemate, and if it's going to be able to protect itself, it's going to have to make progress politically and have good governance. And I would say we are not there yet in Iraq.
Well, Mr. Rushdie, I guess when it comes to what exactly is going on in Iraq, you have the say here. So, Mr. Rushdie, help us to understand your analysis of the latest situation, particularly political stability, and whether there's vacuum in which terrorism would love to seek opportunities from.
Well, still we are seeking as Iraqis the opportunities that it's supposed to be appeared after defeat Daesh. The problem is that there are no clear vision, not from the Iraqi government or from the local government, from the local government that it's supposed to be liberated from Daesh. So we still, as we all know, is that we have no things to see exactly how it can be happen in the next, let's say, at least the next 6 months or maybe the next year. Because it's supposed to be that after defeating Daesh, there will be rebuilding of the destroyed areas. And also, the most important thing is that defeating Daesh, it means that also we must defeat the other major problems like corruption, unemployment, and so on. So still, defeating Daesh is a very wide slogan now, but still there's nothing under it as a vision how to rebuild Iraq again.
Right. Ms. He, of course we all understand the reason why terrorism exists. There's vacuum of political power, there is poverty, there is economic challenges that they can penetrate in order to gain more ground worldwide. But obviously from the earlier two scholars, it seems that the problems have not been solved, and there's always the danger that terrorism may come back and reclaim their territory, quote unquote.
Yes, that's certainly. All those dangers are still there. Even though 1 year on seems some situation has been getting improved, but if you look at the picture a little bit bigger, you will see this ISIL now relocated to somewhere else, like moving to the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, and also moving to the Libya, like North Africa, and even some go back to the home country, becoming called a lonely wolf, this kind of individual attack, terror attack. So those terrorist issue, I think, is far from saying, oh, everything's done, everything's okay. So apart from those elements you just mentioned, poverty, like a vacuum of those power, I think also this geopolitical issue, like those countries, the disputes, fighting for power, fighting for their own influence. Some conflicts even can be called, this is like an agent war. This is behind. There are big powers behind. Some those other countries on the front.
If we could just mention some of those, Mr. Walsh, you see the things going on between Saudi Arabia and Iran, certainly, and the United States. Now the Iran nuclear deal is rather trying to scrap off under the current administration. You also see Turkey, Saudi Arabia with the latest journalist tragedy. And you have seen in Yemen, for example, the chaos that is still going on with the U.S. now relatively unwilling to participate. You also have Syria issue as well. So you have surrounding Iraq this very vulnerable area which could all feed the unpredictability and the coming back of terrorism or other extreme forces into the region. Mr. Walsh.
We need to separate two things. One is the role of outside powers or regional powers that interfere in countries' affairs. So obviously Iran has a natural concern about what the future of Iraq will be. You know, they fought that bloody war in the 1980s. So they are present in Iraq. The U.S. is present in Iraq. Saudi Arabia and Qatar now are trying to maneuver a little bit in there. And of course Iraq, geographically, when you look at a map, what is it next to? It's next to Syria. And Syria, is a mess right now. And it's a mess that could get worse in the coming years as the U.S. is suggesting that it plans to stay and expand its mission. But having said all that, yes, the problem of other players in the region with their own interests makes things more difficult. But at the end of the day, the central issue is whether the Iraqis themselves can get their act together politically. So right now, we have a division between the two Shia parties that won the last election. They are supposed to have appointed a government. It's 6 months, and there's still no interior minister and some of the other crucial cabinet position. So, yes, the outside players make it worse and more complicated, but at the end of the day, the Iraqi parties, the two parties that won the election, have to find a way to work together, share power, and form a strong government that can provide security and economic reconstruction. That's the single most important thing.
Ms. He, of course, we do not want to debate about the pros and cons of so-called democracy or democratic system, but certainly you do see a premature situation over there for elections to happen and to happen in a way that all parties would accept the final result. So the vulnerability is there, uncertain is there. You see weak governments, both central and local. Ms. He, that means what? Will the Iraqis be able to come together and seek a political solution to the current chaos?
We all know last year when these Kurds in the Iraqi, they want to declare the independence. And then immediately Iraqi central government made a very tough reaction. They sent troops over there and then trying to make those things a failure. Those kind of demanding for the independence of the Kurds. So right now, I think because the Kurds troops has been back off, and then there is some vacuum there. This vacuum either influenced by the Iraqi central government, also neither also controlled by the Kurds military forces. Right. So that's a vacuum of the security. Exactly, that's the thing that those extremists can make their existence there. So this unity, less of the unity of the country, and then intertwined with this insecurity and coming from those extremists make Iraqi this political consolidarity and also economic development, all those visions. Now it's very hard to push forward in a symmetric way.
We need to have Mr. Rushdie to comment on this, of course. Mr. Rushdie, you are based in Baghdad. You are participating politically in this process. You see what's going on around you. What are the reasons? Is there something that can be done in order to make things at least to calm down?
I think we need a strong government. The problem is that we cannot treat something like that because there are so many problems, political, economical, and the most important thing, social also, because at the end, what happened in the last election is that the boycott was very high. That means Iraqis actually become desperate from the political process, which means that they are not actually wishing that in the next few years there will be some sort of a hope for Iraq. So what actually means is the political parties should make it together, some sort of a vision about Iraq, let's say Iraq 2030, and work on it, and also the most important thing, reducing corruption.
Those are the goals, but how to achieve it, that is the question, isn't it? From your perspective, is there a roadmap, is there a blueprint, and what will be the outside forces, in a way, their impact on the current process in Iraq be?
There is no roadmap. There is no actual roadmap. The Prime Minister has actually tried to make the government for the last 6 months, and there is no hope on that. The most important thing is that we need the help of the international community, we need the help of the regional forces, just to make Iraq more safe first, and secondly, we need our neighbors to make less intervene in our country. And the third thing is that we need to unify especially between Sunni, Shia, and Kurds, in a way to have our own vision. And our own vision, that means Iraq should be unified, should not be separated. And also the most important thing is that we still have the success factors. Definitely oil is one of them, which means that we can make some sort of reforms to our economy in a way or another. That means it will make prosperity to the Iraqis. And also, according to this new government, the Prime Minister showed us 20 points that he will try to manage well to see new Iraq. But the problem is that he's so weak is that he cannot make his own cabinet until now.
Okay. Well, Ahmed Rushdie, thank you so much for helping us to understand the situation. Let's go to our two other experts, Mr. Walsh. We understand outside forces, for example, coming from the United States. U.S. started the war in Iraq, and that war lasted for 10 years, if not more. Mr. Walsh, the question is now the U.S. is shifting its priority from the Middle East, let's say, to the Asia-Pacific region. And oil is not a priority for U.S. anymore because of shale gas. Back in the United States, you are self-reliant. So not that relevant, some would argue, this region to the U.S. interests. So how to see that you started something, but now it's less relevant?
Well, I think different players would welcome a reduced role of the United States in the Middle East, and God knows the United States has spent a lot of blood and treasure there. My concern is not so much that the U.S. will walk away. My current concern is the U.S. is going to get more deeply involved in Syria, and I think that's a mistake. And I'm also worried that the U.S. is going to be more deeply involved in the Iranian-Saudi rivalry, backing Saudi Arabia, and that could lead to a new war, and I'm worried about that. So I would actually prefer, you know, there's all this talk about the pivot, U.S. pivot to Asia and all that, but it hasn't happened because we keep fighting wars in the Middle East, and frankly, I would welcome the U.S. to have a less of a presence in the Middle East and not be involved in more conflicts. So less Syria, and certainly we don't want another conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That'll hurt everyone.
Ms. He, about that too. I mean, the role of the United States has always been the center of debate in the Middle East, particularly regarding the Iraq war. And now the war ended, and even the war against the terrorism ended, but there's always a vacuum, as we all worry about. So, Ms. He, the role of the United States from your analysis, and also the other players as well.
Well, yes, we have seen a lot of those tragedy and the proxy war in Middle Eastern countries. Actually, to be frankly, I don't think the United States has played a very constructive role in the Middle East. We see the Iraqi war has been done by the U.S. Afghanistan war also has been taken by the U.S. But either of them has been now maintaining a so-called democracy or peaceful like economic development. They're still struggling. They're still in the process fighting very hard for bringing even the peace, not mention the democracy. So even take this Iraqi as a thing, those three, like Sunni, Shia, and the Kurds, easily set them down, saying, all right, all those three groups should have a representative, should be, you know, keep a balance between them. But during the past years, actually, United States also made this kind of trying to keep a balance between this power among those three groups. But when the things goes to on the real ground, and then you find it's very hard to keep that kind of balance. You know, the Iraqi, before the Saddam Hussein has made a very very hard those efforts, trying to use very strong authority and then to unite the country as a whole. But now when you're trying to bring those equality to those three, and then you see some stronger power coming up, like Kurds. They don't want to be, you know, equal with the other two. So that's making it very difficult. Plus, like Iran's influence there, plus now the Syria, the chaos there. So so all the countries, they play some hands in other countries' land, territory. So I don't think it's some easy way to get solution right now.
Well, let's talk about the 20 points also Mr. Rushdie earlier illustrated about the current administration in Iraq. Mr. Walsh, of course, those are the priorities that the current administration wants to persuade this constituency that they are able to do their job. But now the circumstances obviously does not allow them to, in a way, implement every one of those points. To you, what is the most important thing when it comes to the economy, when it comes to try to reduce poverty, which is the source of why terrorism happened?
Well, I think the two most important things are they find a compromise candidate for the Minister of Internal Security, and then secondly, they have a budget. But you can't have a budget unless you have a government. And because the budget's getting pushed back, the provincial governments don't know how much money they're going to have, and so they can't engage in reconstruction projects. So if you're going to rebuild the economy, then you need to have reconstruction projects, and you can't have reconstruction projects without a budget, and you can't have a budget without a government. So I think the two Shia parties need to end this dispute, The technocratic government under the new prime minister needs to form a cabinet, and then they need to pass a budget so that they can begin spending money to rebuild the economy.
Ms. He, this is happening at a time when, as we say always, the world is experiencing dramatic change these days, geopolitics, and the role of the Middle East in the overall world politics these days. So, Ms. He, some of the priorities that this administration tried to implement, can it happen under the current circumstances?
Yes, the current administration of Iraqi, actually, they have been trying very hard. To have this reconstruction conference and put forward their strategy. They do have. They have those development plan, so saying what kind of projects now they have been planning, trying to get those funding issue coming from those donors, those other big powers globally. But unfortunately, even if I mention, now I cannot help to mention United States' role again, because they have kicked off this war on Iraqi. But when the Iraqi government wants those money for reconstruction, I don't see any very good role now has been played by the United States. They are saying we don't have money. All right, those American company, you can go ahead to join those conference for those money raising conference, but the government doesn't have. So this is not constructive way. You have the money, like U.S. have the money to increase the budget for the defense, those weapons, upgrade those weapons, but don't have money to rebuild the country. This country has been becoming a mess because of those invasions coming from the U.S. So I think we cannot always blame the Iraqi government, saying, oh, you are not capable, you have been doing things wrong. We also need to think the roots of this war.
All right, before we go, final sentence or two from every one of you. Mr. Walsh.
Well, I just hope that the core theme here is that the internal politics, the two Shia parties have to break the impasse, form a government, pass a budget, and then when there's a real functioning government, it'll be easier to attract outside investment, easier to attract donor aid. So the job one, form a government.
Okay, Ms. He, a sentence or two.
Yeah, I think internal factor and external factor should be combined together, joint hand made. That can make things happening.
All right, He Wenping, Jim Walsh, and also our appreciation earlier to Ahmed Rashdi from Iraq. Thank you so much for being with us.